First of all, Jason, you've made the analogy to 9/11 being in New York right now. I think that is the comparison that's been made, is that this is Israel's 9/11.
Yeah.
I think that's a justifiable comparison in two respects. One is this was a terrorist attack. It was an atrocity. This was a massacre of civilians. Even if you're somebody who believes in the Palestinian cause, you should be able to recognize that these were war crimes.
Yeah.
The videos are coming out. The stories are coming out. In particular, the rounding up and slaughter of 260 attendees at a music festival was really beyond the pale. They're clearing some of these farming villages and so forth and finding the bodies, families basically killed. Anyway, we don't need to repeat all of the details here, but this was, I think, an attack on civilians that is reminiscent of 9/11 and has affected the Israeli people in a similar way. I think the other analogy to 9/11 that's worth discussing is the reaction to this, or what Israel's going to do and what the reaction is by U.S. political figures. You heard people like Nikki Haley basically saying to Netanyahu, finish them. It wasn't exactly clear whether she was just talking about Hamas or the whole Gaza Strip or maybe Iran. Yeah. And then if there was any ambiguity about that, you just had Lindsey Graham come out and say, level the place, meaning referring to all of Gaza.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I'm very concerned that one of the purposes here of the terrorists was to provoke an overreaction like the U.S. Engaged in after 9/11. Remember, we were viciously attacked. We were wounded. We then lashed out and plunged into 2 decades of wars in the Middle East. What was the result of that? We lost thousands of lives of our own soldiers. We spent trillions of our treasure. Millions of people on the other side died.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we only changed the geopolitical map of the Middle East in ways that were ultimately unfavorable for us. Iran became a more powerful country. The region became destabilized. And we squandered the sympathy that the United States had and its moral position that we had after 9/11 in the eyes of much of the world. Yeah. So the U.S., I think, fell for the trap that I think bin Laden laid, which was to provoke us into an overreaction. I think that is one of the goals of terrorists, is to create such an outrage, such a provocation that they will bait the other side into an overreaction. I'm quite concerned that could happen here. I think that our U.S. leaders should be, as friends of Israel, should be counseling a cool-headed response. I think praying for war with Iran or suggesting that the entire Gaza Strip should be leveled would be doing exactly the wrong thing. It would ignite the Arab street
and to your
throughout
point,
the Middle East.
Perhaps that was the goal here. And we're trying to figure out what is the goal of this attack that was planned for years. And perhaps that was the goal, is to try to take all the hard-fought peace and progress that has been made in that process over the last couple of years, Abraham Accords, and stability, and then just really create a full-scale escalation.
I think that's right. I mean, look, I think Israel is within its rights to dismantle and destroy Hamas. Hamas is an organization that in its charter has said they're committed to the destruction of Israel. They've now committed this atrocity. Again, it was, if they had just limited their attack on uniformed Israeli officers and military, I think that would be one thing, but they went much further than that. The vast majority of the casualties here are civilians who were murdered in atrocious ways. So I think they're a terrorist organization, and Israel is well within its rights to destroy them. However, the question is how you do that.
Yeah.
Like a lot of terrorist organizations, Hamas can kind of melt away into the population of Gaza. They apparently have these elaborate tunnel networks. They've got bunkers. So it's not clear that you can destroy them from the sky through bombing. Those kinds of bombs would lead to a lot of civilian casualties, which will inflame the situation and turn world opinion against Israel. At the same time, if they go in with ground forces, that seems like a really tough situation as well, because Hamas is waiting for them, and they'll have to fight a guerrilla war in a very tightly packed, dense urban area where Hamas likely has anti-tank weapons that we've seen that have been so effective against armored vehicles in Ukraine. Again, if the fighting gets too hot, they can disappear into these tunnel networks. There's going to be IEDs everywhere. it's going to be a very, very tough fight for the Israelis. So I think they're in an incredibly tough spot. I'm not quite sure what the right reaction is for them, but I do think that if the reaction is this, let's call it the Lindsey Graham level the place reaction, I think that could set off a much wider regional war or even a world war. And that is not something that's ultimately going to help Israel. And I hope that our leaders are wise enough to be counseling against that.